Very much, everybody. Thank you for attending and for joining us for this digital discovery session. This is the second digital discovery session of the year, and this is being brought to you by UNEP's Digital Transformation Task Force. My name is David Jensen. I'm coordinating our digital transformation process at the moment, and I'll be moderating the session today. And today's session is about a smart green world, making digitalization work for sustainability. I've got a typo in my speaking points. It should be a phenomenal session. I've read the book cover to cover. I absolutely loved it. And I'm really excited to have the two authors here today. So before I hand over to our guests, I just wanted to offer a quick reminder on what we're trying to get out of these digital discovery sessions. So first and foremost, it's really an offer for a deep dive on a specific digital transformation application or a specific policy challenge. The second objective is really to offer a safe space for peer-to-peer exchange and for really having an in-depth conversation. There are no silly questions in these digital discovery sessions. Everything's on the table. If you have a question, it is most likely that other people have the same question, so do not hesitate to ask it. And the third objective is really to see if we can carve out some kind of follow-up activity that we can then take forward within UNEP's digital transformation sub-program. So those are the three objectives, and I really encourage a dynamic exchange. We've designed the agenda today to be divided into a number of chunks, and at the end of each of those chunks, there will be a moment for questions and conversation to really keep the conversation flowing. So with those background remarks, let me introduce our two speakers. Today we have Tilman Santarius, who is a professor at the Technical University of Berlin and the Einstein Center for the Digital Future, and he's also a senior fellow at the Institute for Ecological Economy Research in Germany. Tilman, do you want to sort of raise your hand? Say hello. There we go. And we also have Steffan Lange, who's a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for Ecological Economy Research, also in Germany. Thank you both for taking the time. You guys hooked up to co-author this book a few years ago, which has now been recently published in English. And we hand over the floor to you to walk us through your findings and some of the knowledge that you wanted to impart on the UNEP digital champions in this group, as well as a number of external colleagues that are joining the session from our various partners and friends. So please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, David, and thanks first of all for the invitation. This is a really great opportunity for us. We've just book launched this work in December in Brussels. I mean, of course, virtually, but sort of as a European book launch because the book came out in English last year only. And now, so we're super happy to having this discussion here with people from all over the world. And we're most eager to get feedback and to hear what you are doing and to engage in a common discussion. You've presented ourselves real quick. Maybe it's interesting to tell a little bit about our backgrounds. I'm a social scientist. I'm a sociologist, also which have studied anthropology and economics. And maybe this is just interesting to see that I'm not coming from the tech side. I'm coming from social science. I've been working on sustainability questions, mainly environmental sustainability, like climate policy, but also issues like world trade for the last 20 years. And I've been dealing with this nexus of digitalization and sustainability for the last 5 years. Steffan, do you maybe want to say a few words on your background?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Well, I'm an environmental economist, trained mostly in economics, and I work at the Institute for Ecological Economy Research. And I guess my background is, or apart from digitalization, I work mostly on green growth and other macroeconomic concepts for sustainability. Maybe also interesting is that apart from academia, I used to work in a couple of NGOs. So that's also part of my past.
Good. I could also add that I've been working with NGOs voluntarily, like German Watch. I'm currently with Greenpeace. Anyway, I'm starting the screen sharing here now. And just to tell you a little bit what our plan is for this session, I think David has already announced we're trying to split it in 2 or 3 blocks to make it more interactive. We don't like the idea of having like 45 minutes presentation straight and then people are starting to check emails in parallel. We rather do shorter packages and then engage in a discussion, and then bring in another package. So what is the plan for today? First of all, we tell you a little bit more about the background. Where do we come from and why did we actually write this book? And probably also like a little bit of its overall characteristics. And then follow suit with the first part of an analysis, digitalization and environmental sustainability. Steffan is giving the analysis to you, and I will follow up with one of the guiding principles in our book that we suggest sort of as a orientation according to which digitalization could be shaped in a way that it maximizes its potential to sustainability. So then after having this environmental block, we can engage in a discussion. And then agenda item 3 is sort of a second analysis, looking more at the social side, digitalization and social justice, socio-economic implications and opportunities. Again, Steffan is giving the analysis. I will present another guiding principle of our book, and then we can engage in a discussion. If there is enough time, we can then later do a third block with policy suggestions that we have in the book, and we could comprehensively present some of the policy solutions, and again can engage in a discussion. So I hope that works and makes it a bit more interactive if we break up our input in 3 slots.
That sounds wonderful. That sounds wonderful.
Good. So a bit more on our background. Steffan and me, we have acquired a research group in the year 2015, which started in 2016. It's a large group, 6 researchers, 8 people in total, all from different disciplines: economics, psychology, engineering, marketing, sociology. And so we look at digitalization and sustainability from different angles and lenses. If you want to hear more about the research group, please visit our website with lots of publications, some video material, also some information about the events we've been doing in the last few years. I just very briefly run you through the foci of our research group. One of the research foci we have is the question of decoupling and economic growth or degrowth in relation to digitalization. So the big question is, does digitalization actually mitigate or aggravate the chances to decouple? Second focus is the implications of digitalization on social institutions. In what sense are imaginaries changing towards in the way of digitalization? How does that help to spur transformation in sustainability? A third focus is digital consumption. Now we're all living in increasingly digitalized consumption environments like e-commerce, online shopping, platforms, etc. What are the opportunities and risks here for sustainability? And a fourth focus is on energy questions related to smart homes. So there's a lot of potential of smart homes to reduce energy. What are some of the caveats? What are the potentials? How can we maximize them? These are just 4 foci. In the book, and now we're coming to the presentation of the book. In the book, Steffan and I have actually even taken a broader look. We have tried to very broadly sketch out as many nexi of digitalization and sustainability as possible in order to give a broad overview of the whole discourse. And I think here are some of the characteristics. First of all, shortly after we started our group, we noticed that there's a very smart and neat research community called ICT4S, ICT for Sustainability, which does conferences since the year 2013. So there's of course lots of research ongoing in the past. But there's none book out there that addresses the larger public, media also. We call it a transdisciplinary book, which goes beyond the mere academic audience into the general public towards policymakers. And so this was one of the key aims of the book. Let's sum up the research and make it available to a larger and more public debate. Secondly, to our opinion, there wasn't any book out there that connects social sustainability questions and environmental sustainability questions with regard to digitalization. So this is what we're trying the book, and we're, as I said earlier in the agenda, we're going to give you insights of both the environmental analysis and the socio-economic analysis with regard to digitalization. Again, I think there's none book out there so far that tries to have this holistic view of what is the state of research and what can be some overall conclusions we draw. I think there's so much research need still there, and there's so many questions that we cannot answer yet. But, you know, drawing a line and drawing some overall conclusions could be interesting, and that's what we tried with the book. And finally, we don't only engage in analysis, but also prepare some policy suggestions. How can digitalization be shaped in the most sustainable way in order to use it then for agenda setting in politics, in public media? And just to say a few words on this, the book got published in Germany in 2018 and has achieved a significant coverage in media, TV, radio, press, on Twitter and elsewhere. And I think we were one of the reasons, amongst activities from other actors, that has now also led to the situation that the German Federal Ministry of the Environment is very progressive on an environmental policy agenda for digitalization. What is the structure of the book? Pretty straightforward. We have a larger part on analysis, one chapter on ecological sustainability, one chapter on socio-economic justice questions. Then in the second third of the book, we develop guiding principles. What could be guiding principles for a sustainable digitalization? And we present to you at least two of the guiding principles today. And then finally, we engage in policy suggestions, policies and measures for policymakers, but also design principles for companies or software developers, or also suggestions for users. What can users do, or what can NGOs do in terms of digital literacy for a sustainable digitalization? Off we go. And I turn it over to Steffan, and he's starting with our analysis on digitalization and environmental sustainability.
Steffan, I believe you're on mute.
Thanks, always the same mistake. Can you?
Somebody has to do it every meeting. It's no problem.
Yeah, 1 year in and still making the same mistake. So are you seeing my presentation?
Perfectly well, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah, let's start with the environmental aspects. And let me begin by pointing out, and we've discussed that a lot, by pointing out that there are great potentials to improve environmental sustainability, in particular due to either increasing efficiency or by facilitating coordination. And I think a good way to approach the relationship between digitalization and the environment is to look at different economic sectors, and we also do that in the book. And I want to talk here about 4 economic sectors. And let me start with the energy sector. So in the energy sector, the digital tools are, from our point of view, essential. They are necessary to facilitate the transition to a 100% renewable energy system. Basically 2 parts to that. The first one is that all the small solar panels and windmills and other power plants that will be part of this hopefully future 100% renewable energy system need to be coordinated, and this coordination is way more complex than the coordination was before in the old system, because before we had only few plants, and now the number is just way bigger. And the second aspect with regard to the energy system is flexibility of energy demand. So we need to move towards a system where the demand adjusts to supply, because the wind is not always blowing and the sun is not always shining. And in order to individuals, households, but also firms, so that they know when they are supposed to use less or more energy, the information needs to be there, and that is only feasible by using digital tools. The second sector is mobility, and here what is of particular importance, and maybe here I make the side comment that we in this analysis mostly talk about countries of the global north. I think that is important. We also come to aspects of countries of Global South later, but here our book and our analysis focused on the countries of the Global North. So with regard to mobility, a major aspect is that we shift from cars to public transport and shared mobility, and digitalization can play a major role in this. And I just want to give a couple of examples. So one is bike sharing. Most of you know that, and it works way better when you do it digitally facilitated. Another one is on-call buses. And a third example that I want to give is that we need to decrease, certainly in the Global North, the amount of flights, and all the digital tools can make long train ones way more convenient. And there are many more examples. Third economic sector, agriculture. Most of you have probably heard or are familiar with precision farming, where digital tools can help to decrease the pesticides and fertilizers that are needed. But digital tools could also be used in a much broader sense to have a paradigm shift away from monocultural production towards a smaller, more adjusted to geographical features kind of production. And the fourth one is the consumption sector. So there I would argue three major aspects. So one is that green or sustainable consumption of green and sustainable products can be increased because the amount of products available to me in the online world is just way larger. But I think even more importantly is sharing and secondhand. And I think secondhand is a very good example because you need the information where actually to get the secondhand as good or service. Well, services are not secondhand. The secondhand good in order to be able to buy it. So these four sectors, I think, give great examples how digitalization can help to improve environmental sustainability. But a lot of those aspects are potentials, and I want to now turn to our analysis on how digitalization has unfolded in the past and what it means for environmental sustainability. And let me start by giving an example. I think a couple of years ago, and maybe even still today, a lot of people thought that streaming is immaterial. You just open your laptop, you start the video, there's nothing material to it apart from the laptop that you have anyway. But when you look at the energy and resources associated with it, this is actually not the case. So you need a lot of electricity for running the computer, but also for the network and the energy and the server parks that are working in the background and that are facilitating the streaming. Additionally, you also have, and this is a very good example, you also have rebound effects. So due to this new technology, due to streaming, people are watching a lot more videos than they used to when there was only DVDs and television. For example, because you can just use take your device wherever and watch it on the portable device wherever you want to. And this combined now leads to the fact that about 70% of global data is due to video streaming. So video streaming is really the great part of data, and with data, of course, with data transmission, of course, there is electricity usage in the networks and also in the server parks. So this is one example. I next want to give a bit more of a macroeconomic perspective, and here I have numbers for Germany. And you see that in Germany, on average, the people emit 12 tons of CO2 equivalents per year, and 0.85 tons are due to ICT. And on the right-hand side, you see how it is distributed among the different aspects. So you have manufacturing of the goods itself, you have usage, when you actually run the computer or the smartphone, and then you have in the background the networks and the data centers that also make up quite a big share. So this is substantial. It's let's say 1 ton out of 12. That's already substantial. I want to add that globally, the estimations are about 3% of CO2 emissions due to ICT. So it's a bit lower, but even 3% is substantial. And now even moving to the real macroeconomic perspective, I would say, one can argue on the last slide we saw there's a lot of CO2 emissions due to ICT, but also, as I said before, there are potentials to save CO2 or other environmental aspects elsewhere. And on the macro level, we point out 4 effects of digitalization, and 2 are positive and 2 are negative. And in the end, I can already say that now, at the end, we come to the conclusion that it's ambivalent or it's a zero-sum game. So the 2 positive on the left-hand side are efficiency. I already talked about that. You see that in basically all economic sectors, and a further move towards tertiarization, so more services and less physical products. And on the negative side, I also touched upon those 2 effects already. There's the material basis, so the usage, the production, and the networks and service in the background of ICT. And there are rebound effects, so an increase in consumption due to digital possibilities. And in the end, you have kind of a zero-sum game. And now I want to come back to my first slide, where you see, okay, in the beginning, I said there are great potentials, and then there was the zero-sum game. And what we would argue is that digitalization can only unfold its potentials when the broader economic frameworks within each of those sectors are geared towards an environmental transformation. And within this framework, then digitalization can unfold its potentials. And this is where we need to get back to. And with this, I give over to Tilman, who will tell you more about this positive vision.
Thanks, Steffan. And yes, I want to directly pick up from what Steffan said and lead you a bit through our guiding principles that we develop in the book. I'm starting this screen just at the very beginning. This is a table taken from our book with guiding principles for sustainable digitalization. You basically see 3 overarching guiding principles: digital sufficiency, strict data protection, and focus on the common good, with each of them having some sub-dimensions. And we today will talk about digital sufficiency first. I'm going to do that right now. And later on, focus on the common good. We cannot cover all of it. But this is just to give you a broad idea.
Did we lose Tilman?
Yes, we lost him, I think.
I think some people are having trouble with Teams right now. I saw Allison was kicked off as well. She's back in. How are you guys in terms of reading each other's minds and knowing what he was about to present? Are you guys interoperable?
Yeah, I think I can give it a try. Just give me a minute. I mean, okay, I'll pick it up.
Sure, thanks.
Okay. What Tilman was saying, that is, today we're going to focus on the digital sufficiency and the focus on common good. And I first want to talk about the digital sufficiency. So this principle includes 4 sub-principles, and you see them here. It's data sufficiency, technical sufficiency, user sufficiency, and economic sufficiency. And maybe I start with technical sufficiency. So technical sufficiency regards the devices themselves. So first of all, they need to be programmed more efficient and smarter. I mean, that's already part of the efficiency strategies, but also they need to be used longer, and they need to be repairable, so that we don't need to buy a smartphone every other year. The data sufficiency aspect regards the fact that the increase in data that is being processed and that is being transmitted has been decreasing in the past. I said that regarding videos, but also regarding other applications, and there is fear, for example, due to virtual reality, that it will explode in the future, and that brings about that we need more networks and more servers, etc. So software needs to be written in a manner that is data sufficient. And there's a nice combination between this environmental perspective, but also with data privacy regards, because when you have less data, you also tend to have less privacy issues. Moving to the right side, user sufficiency. that's the idea that the digital tools are being used by users not only in a sufficient manner, so maybe watching less videos, but also to facilitate a sufficient lifestyle. So, for example, you use the smartphone or the app on the smartphone to use public transport instead of using it, for example, for a driverless car. From an environmental perspective, the driverless car is has the potential to increase transport a lot. And so the question is, what do users actually use it for? And they can use it for sufficiency measures.
Steffan, I'm back. Sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Some network error. So I'm happy that you took over. Do you want to continue, or?
No, that's fine. I covered technical data and user sufficiency, and you can now conclude with economic sufficiency.
Ah, okay. So you already ran through the pillars.
Yeah.
Now then, please go ahead and add the last dimension, and then I follow up on the general remark. Sorry, I think that makes more sense.
Okay. So economic sufficiency is the last one, and that regards the question which actors, or basically which firms and what type of firms characterize the future digitalization. At the moment, we'll come back to that in a second as well. We have a lot of large monopolies that drive digitalization and also characterize it and drive it in the manner that fits them well. But economic sufficiency would mean that those large platforms are, for example, cooperative platforms or communally organized platforms, and that in that manner they can also support sufficiency at the economic level. And with that, do you want to share your screen, Tilman, or how?
No, I think that's fine. Maybe am I right that I dropped out after I showed this slide with the overall guiding principles?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So maybe I just finish up. Thanks so much, Steffan, and sorry for this hassle. Maybe I just close by saying, why did we develop this principle of digital sufficiency? Did you already touch upon this, Steffan?
I don't think so. I would say so.
Right. So I think given the large efficiency improvements that you mentioned earlier, but giving the caveats that some rebound effects, growth effects, the material basis of digitalization can eat up some of the savings potentials, we believe that we should much more integratively pursue all three strategies of sustainability: efficiency, consistency, and sufficiency. Okay, these are the three basic strategies for sustainability, and I think you all know what efficiency is all about. Improving the input-output ratio, using ICTs to make the various sectors more energy or material efficiency or so. Consistency is the whole question about improving the circular economy, and has two sides: making ICTs more circular themselves, but also use digital tools to enhance other sectors and areas to become more circular. And then thirdly, the sufficiency principle, and I guess, Steffan, you've explained it, is use the devices frugally and also use them in a way that we achieve absolute reductions and not only relative reductions. And if we think those three together, I think we can maximize digitalization sustainability potential. And we have spelled out the principle of digital sufficiency in particular, and Steffan has just done that to you, because we believe that efficiency in digitalization comes along anyway. And there's lots of cost savings related to efficiency, whereas sufficiency is a strategy that we need to much more actively pursue as a society or as policymakers. And that is why we think we should stretch this strategy and think it integratively with the other. Okay, this is just my final remark. And now we turn it over to David for the discussion, for the first discussion that we can share. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, colleagues. There's two questions in the chat. I just wanted to get a sense before we hand over to Francesco and James. I mean, you talked about the fact that this is a zero-sum game unless the policy environment really offers the right kind of incentives for environmental transformation. So do you have a sense concretely, like what are the most important priorities in that policy environment to create that incentive structure so that these kinds of gains can be more than zero sum?
Steffan, you want to go ahead, or
should we go ahead? Okay. So from I mean, there are many different policy aspects. So, for example, at the EU level, you have the what is it in English? The eco-design framework, or what is it called? Tilman, help me out. So that regards how the devices, etc., are being designed. And on those small aspects, you know, repairability, etc., those I think are quite well known. But I also want to focus on the macroeconomic level, and I think you don't get around the point that you know, digitalization, how digitalization develops, you know, it's not good or bad in itself. It's the question is how does it unfold, and it can only unfold in a good manner under the right conditions, and the right conditions are basically what we know from an environmental transformation already. So the point is resources and CO2 emissions need to become way more expensive from an economic perspective, certainly from an environmental economics perspective, so that firms have and also users have the incentive to develop digital tools that then facilitate sufficiency and not that lead to a lot of rebound effects. I don't think you get around that point in the end.
Thanks very much. Tilman, do you want to come in as well, or do you want me to head over to the chat?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I wanted to give the floor actually first to James, because this speaks directly to his question, and then we'll pass it over to Francesco. So James, do you want to take the floor?
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you, David. Steffan, Tilman, nice presentation initially. Happy to hear that you guys have a background in environmental economics and sociology. And as you were speaking, I was just struggling to get a sense of, I may be jumping the gun here, maybe we'll cover it later, but I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on how digitalization can influence policymakers from different sectors. You talked about mobility, energy, agriculture, or how can digitalization influence different countries to help them talk to each other to ensure some level of policy coherence. I mean, of late, I don't know, my understanding of this or my perception is that there's been some form of peer pressure with institutions. Everybody is taking up a digital trajectory, but I'm not too sure that, you know, is it reactive, or, you know, is there a plan to this? Just wondering, just basically what your thoughts are on how this can influence policy coherence. Over. Thank you.
That's a tough question. Maybe shall I start, Steffan? Well, first of all, I think we're not talking about a whole new policy field of digital policy or internet governance or so. These are policy fields which are already established, but which usually are very loosely connected to other policy fields relevant for, let's say, environmental sustainability. So you have the transport ministry, you have the energy ministry, you have maybe the Ministry of the Internal talking about privacy and consumer rights. You have the Agricultural and Farming Ministry, and so these are not very well connected. And in Germany, for example, you have the Transport Ministry, which is also responsible for the IT infrastructure, telecommunications, basically. So many different resorts and departments, all following their own logic. And I think what we want to achieve is a more integrated, more policy coherence, more integrated approach, sure, so that there is more connection taking place between these ministries. And I think you can also already see that, at least in the case of Germany. I'll bring another example of the EU. We just saw in December, like 6 weeks ago, we saw council decisions at EU level of from the environmental ministers, which carved out an agenda for digitalization to make it work for a safer environment or so. I think that's the title. And this agenda was very well thought through and discussed ahead with DG Connect, with the Commission Directorate General, which is responsible for the internet. And so I think this is for the first time that the Council for Environmental Ministries and DG Connect have really worked together in that sense. And that is the way I think it has to go. Did that answer your question, actually?
Yes, it was more of a general thing. I do acknowledge that it's a bit of a difficult question, but I'm happy for the insight that you provided, especially with the recent reactions by the Commission and how they are trying to bring that together. Definitely.
Great, thank you, Tilman. I wanted to pass the floor now to Francesco, who has a question, and then I wanted to hand it over to Monica. So Francesco, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, David, and congratulations for the presentation. I'm actually calling from Latin America, from Panama City, and well, just to say that particularly in regard to your presentation and thinking at what you just presented in the context of the region where I'm working now, I'm just thinking that possibly my understanding is that digital transformation cannot be implemented overnight. So it is, I can understand it is a process, a long process involving different actors, academia, of course, institutions, citizens, and it needs a lot of education and support also from the political level. So and science policy dialogue here is really key. So my question is very naive, and my question is thinking at different context, like for instance Latin America, developing countries, low-income countries, very low in some countries digital capacity, access to data infrastructure, etc. Is there a metric to measure the risk factors, the risk of failure to implement or to invest in digital transformation in a context that is not mature, not ready yet to fully support and to fully implement these very interesting and very relevant solutions. Over to you.
Thanks, Francesco. And maybe just to add on to that, there's a big push by the Secretary General to close the digital divide by 2030, right? That means effectively providing digital infrastructure to half the planet. And as Francesca said, do we have any guidance in terms of the risks of closing that digital divide, especially in terms of energy and e-waste and basically all of the downsides? And how do we do it in the right kind of sequence? Do you have guidance or any kind of best practice on both of those items? Francesca specializes in stumping our guests. Are you guys feeling stumped?
No, we're just figuring out who speaks first. Steffan, you want to go or shall I?
You're welcome to do so.
Okay, I can just try to formulate some ideas. These are big questions. First of all, I think there's no way other than trying to close the digital divide. But what does it mean, actually, closing the digital divide? It can mean like to increase and much promote and spur ongoing digitalization in the global south. But it could also mean that I formulated it a little bit in the populist way, to sort of put a brake on too much of an ongoing digitalization in the global north. Because what we're seeing right now, in particular with the rise of artificial intelligence and technologies that are based on hugely energy and data intensive processes, that the tools that are coming out there might even widen the digital gap because it's requiring best case data centers, high-tech infrastructures, and it's not the kind of smartphone 1.0 kind of digitalization, which would be easier to follow up on. So widening the gap can have two reasons. The global north is going too fast, or we need to spur up the global south, to put it a little bit schematically. Second, I think I said there's no way in closing the gap, so I think we need to have more digitalization in the global south. I see a lot of potential of technology that help leapfrogging some of the fossil developments that we've seen in the global north. Let's say energy systems again. We still have that goal of clean energy for all, and I think ICT and digitalization can help a lot in moving into more decentralized, less central and big power plant based energy systems in the global south. And by way of this, it can both enhance digitalization and the transformation towards renewable energies. So we don't need to build up the centralized structures of the past anymore, but we can foster both digitalization and renewable and decentralized energy systems at the same time. And this is just an example. I think the same goes for mobility. Maybe we don't need to build so many highways anymore if we have mobility as a service platforms, which are mushrooming all over the world. And if we foster the development of those platforms, then maybe we can organize mobility in many countries of the global south without making the mistakes of automobile intensive mobility infrastructures. Okay.
Maybe.
Steffan, maybe?
Yeah, maybe I just add one thing, because I very much share this perspective that it's an opportunity to have the digital infrastructure being built up and at the same time having the environmental transformation that we need, and to combine them. Where I'm pessimistic, or where I think this is a great challenge, and it actually I will have a slide on it later, is the question: how do we have more value being created in countries apart from the US and China, basically? Because the great players, the big players, are almost all situated either in the US or in China. And they have been doing these things now for 15, 20, or partly 30, 40 years. They have a great advantage in developing, in particular, software, but also infrastructure. They have control about a lot of those things, and of course, thereby they also they create and they get the value from it. And to bring in actors, big actors probably from other parts of the world, even from Europe, is a real challenge.
Thanks very much. I have a question you might get to in the next part of the presentation, but it's burning inside me and I can't contain it. So you've got digital technologies that can solve very specific problems, as you said, and if in the right policy context, those can be more than zero-sum interactions. They can actually lead to positive transformation. But it seems to me as well that behavioral transformation really depends on how ideas, get seeded in society and amplified and become basically the dominant memes, the dominant forms of behavior. And it seems to me we're not actually yet thinking about how to use social media to really transform sustainability memes into behaviors. Or if we are thinking about it, it's not happening at scale, and it's competing with sort of the traditional growth memes and the traditional capitalistic memes. So I'm wondering if you have any sense of how do we begin to think about sort of social transformation and amplifying those sustainability memes across society using digital tools and technologies?
Yeah, I think that very well fits with the digital sufficiency principle, because you could very basically say that efficiency is all about technological solutions while not changing much of the production and consumption structures, probably only incrementally, whereas sufficiency much more focuses on social innovations. Doing things differently, not only doing things better by way of efficiency, but doing things differently. Like, for example, taking public transportation instead of just maximizing the fuel efficiency of cars. So And I think we have lots of good examples how digitalization can foster or bring about social innovations. Let's think of the whole sharing of apartments, Airbnb. It has generated another form of tourism in a way. And you could even think it more radically and have something like couch surfing, which is even more different practice, social practice than before just going on hotel-based vacations. Or other examples are platforms like food sharing or food saver or so, where you can help people getting food items from supermarkets that are running out of date or that cannot be sold anymore, and distribute them amongst people for free even. And it's amazing that this food sharing app is used in Germany by 250,000 people. So this is really a significant number of people now practicing this kind of food sharing and going to supermarkets and getting items that cannot be sold anymore. So these are just few examples. I think there's a lot of things we can imagine how digitalization can spur social innovation. Again, I think we still have to level it with all those trends that rather foster the status quo. And so even to maximize the potential of digitalization for social innovation, we need to shape it in a more progressive way.
Just to add to that, I mean, if you look at the global advertising industry, it's around $600 billion annually. I think about 10% of that is kind of SDG aligned. I think so that means there's a huge gap in terms of what one part of the messaging is saying versus the other. And I guess the question is, how are we ever going to close that gap and amplify sustainability memes and behaviors and ideas to the point where they outcompete the consumption perpetual growth memes and ideas? Anyway, go ahead, Steffan.
Yeah, one thought on that. I believe that advertisement is a great example, but also the way that the apps work, the social media that we have work, that is very much connected to the business model that is behind it. Facebook or other Google, Twitter. Most of the money they earn via advertisements. So and that frames the way they design their products, and that of course influences the people who are on it. So what I'm saying is, I think if you really want to have this different drive, if you want to have, let's say, sufficiency memes spreading everywhere, I think we need to have big actors that have a different agenda. And that is the very interesting question, how to get them about and what type of constitution they have.
Yeah, that's a really interesting.
Be somehow different.
And that's actually a really interesting point, that I think that's one of the issues that we'd like to focus in on UNEP is actually engaging with those big actors. This has been a point that I've been making a while now. We work on the one hand with Google Earth Engine on global environmental monitoring, right, which is fantastic. But the business model that's actually financing Google Earth Engine is that advertising business model on the other side of the company, which is driving consumption. So, it's not really consistent. And we need to make it consistent. So as you say, we really have to understand those business models and make sure they're aligned to the SDGs. Now, we have one more question I'd like to get to from Rob Price. Do we have time, Tilman, or do you want to get back into your presentation?
Yeah, maybe let's go for one more and then we go to the second part.
Okay, great. Rob, do you want to come in with your question or your comment?
Thank you, David. And conscious it's a question that could go on for a while, so I'll try and keep it short. It's great to hear what you've been doing, and I'm very conscious that there's been some excellent work across Europe, Germany and Switzerland, especially in this kind of area that I've seen happening. One of the biggest challenges that I see is actually changing the pace of adoption in businesses. So how do you get large businesses and boards to change the way that they are operating, and finding that right balance that you referenced earlier between voluntary adoption and policy and regulation and compliance? But how do you increase the pace of adoption? Because I'm very conscious in this area, we don't have hundreds of years to sort this out. So how do you get big business to change faster?
I think that's a hard question, and I think we're already at a point where some of the biggest companies, let's say the GAFAM, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, they are probably beyond the point where you could argue that the company as such can behave. These companies are huge. They have different departments. The different departments follow different logics. So it's like just with the other fossil, let's say the Exxon Mobiles or the chemical companies. So it's very hard to argue that how can they come to a point of transformation, because you can probably only make parts of those companies starting to transform and pulling other parts of the company forward. So I really don't have an answer here. But I was on a panel debate with the vice CEO of Google and the German Ministry of the Federal Environment last week. And we were talking about Google's 2030 carbon neutral goal. And the company has a quite progressive goal there. It's pretty good. And then I asked the question that David was mentioning right the minute before. I said, okay, on the one hand, you have great environmental goals. On the other hand, you're spurring consumption with the very business model you're adhering to. So how can Google grow up and sort of leave, at least partly or stepwise, the sole financing through marketing, and the guy, of course, didn't have an answer because it's just hard to imagine how Google can do that transformation. So I think we need more policy regulation in that field. And I think you mentioned in the chat, you mentioned the Digital Market and the Digital Services Act. I think that's a good way to go. We suggest in our book that we need to touch cartel rights and monopoly law. I think we definitely have to think about it so that it becomes easier for companies to transform if they are a bit smaller, a bit dynamic.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
And maybe Rob, later on, we can go back to you to talk about some of the other big ideas you have on the table. Why don't we, Tilman, why don't we go back into the presentation now for round 2?
Great. Yeah. And I think, Steffan, you want to start with the agenda overview short? And it's up to you, I think. And I try to stay on board this time.
That would be nice, yes. So do you still want to say something to the agenda, Tilman, or?
No, fine, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it's the second part, digitalization and social justice, and we do it the same manner. I present the analysis, and Tilman is going to present the principle of common good. So when you look at how digitalization changes the economy, it has the potential to move from a centralized economy. You see on the left-hand side, where you have large actors being at the top of the food chain and small actors contributing to it, to a decentralized or even a distributed economy. And this is regards the different actors, firms, but what we also call prosumers, so consumers who are at the same time producers. You could have that kind of distributed economies, and when you have a look at the book, we say that there are basically 4 aspects that can facilitate that. So the first one is availability of information. Due to the internet, basically everybody who has a device, of course, that's where it's limited, but everybody who has a computer or a smartphone has information access to a lot of information, how to produce things, how to repair things. This is there that was not there 30 years ago or 20 years ago. Well, 20 years ago now, yes, but you know what I mean. The second aspect is access, and in particular access to intermediate goods. So when you want to produce something as a small firm, you have it's way easier to get intermediate goods than in the time before the internet, and also access to markets. It's a lot easier to sell your stuff now. The third aspect is technologies. So digitalization also brings about and could bring about a lot more technologies that facilitate production on a smaller scale, and the 3D printer is a good example, but wouldn't have to be the only example if the potentials would be being used. At the same time, so when you look at all the different SDGs, and not only environmental ones but also the social ones, I think there's a good case and good examples for all SDGs where digitalization can play a very constructive role. However, at the same time, there are, let's say, contrary movements that we need to keep in mind. And the first one goes back, I think, to one of the biggest debates on digitalization, and that question on the question of employment. Almost 8 years ago, a big debate started on how many jobs would be being lost. And here you see that there was a connection between the earnings and the probability that you lose your job. So this graph basically says that the more you earn, the more the less likely you are to lose your job due to digitalization. And at the same time, it's not that unemployment, this graph is for the US. I'm not now talking about the global north. It's not so much that unemployment really rose due to digitalization, but what you do see is that the new jobs that are being created have on average lower wages and are more precarious. And this leads to the fact that you have a bigger divide in wages. People who earn a lot have been increasing their salaries, and people who have earned less in the past are losing salaries. You see that across the OECD countries. And on top of this development in the labor market, you see that this is the second aspect. You see that wage income as a share of total income decreases while capital income increases. And this is also related to digitalization and the phenomenon of the winner takes it all. As a result, and now I make a long story short, as a result, you see income inequality across the OECD. Certainly, that's where I know the numbers within countries on the rise. And here you see the share of the 10% of the top 10% income earners for several countries. And you see that it has been rising over the last 35 years. And part of this is the story of digitalization. As it unfolds now, it could unfold differently. I think this point we make very clear. Coming to another aspect of what we call the digital divide, and I touched upon that in one of the answers before. Here you see the big players globally in the digital world, and you see it distributed or separated into the different continents. And what becomes very clear is that in America, you have the big players, and they are all, the really big players are all in the US. Then you have big players in Asia and in specific in China, where you have this the buildup of a different ecosystem, of a different digital ecosystem over the last 20 years. And you have very few players in Europe and Africa, and I can also add here in Latin America. That's part of the America in this graph, but as I said, most concentrates in the US. And that, of course, brings about the question of value creation and value attaining. So where the big players are, the money is earned, one can say. And that will be a challenge to change that in the future. So the result is kind of similar as from the environmental perspective. The digital tools have very important potentials to bring about, let's say, the several SDGs. But again, we need to steer it differently and very consciously in order to get there. And with this, I again give the floor to Tilman.
Thanks. Yes, great. So again, picking up from the key lessons here, one key lesson is that an increasing share of the internet follows suit dominant marketing interests of big companies. We've reiterated this point already before, also in our last discussion. The second implication is that there's big implications for the labor market and for the distribution of income and wages. And So this leads us to the conclusion that we should focus the shaping of digitalization much more towards the common good. Can you see my slide right now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So again, we have 4 pillars of the focus on the common good guiding principle. Here you see the 4 pillars, and I will walk you through them one by one. First of all, we suggest that internet should be restored as a common. Actually, you could argue, and this is why I have the picture here of a meadow with sheep on there, that the internet as such, the very basic idea back in the 90s was very much that it's a common, like the pastures in medieval times, you know. Every actor, everybody, be it private or business, be it large or small, could meet at eye level on those platforms or in the World Wide Web. But we've seen large asymmetries rising now, with few companies controlling much of the data flows and much of the websites. Actually, for our book, we researched that amongst the 500 biggest websites, there's only one website, Wikipedia, which is non-commercial. All others are commercial in the meantime. So picturing the internet more as a commons, as a global public good, would mean that we have to restore the level playing field between large and smaller actors and companies, but also between commercial and non-commercial actors. And this has very many implications. For instance, try avoid the increased privatization of critical digital infrastructures. You know, much of the newly built undersea cables are not owned by telecommunication companies or governments anymore, but by the content providers, Microsoft and Amazon and others. Or another aspect of internet as commons is think about publicly governed cloud and data centers. In Europe, we have the Gaia X project to generate a European cloud project. And there's many more aspects. And one is already one that we've touched upon, try to ensure that social media or web search or so is less infiltrated by interests of marketing and advertisement. This would also play into the hands of restoring the internet as a commons. Secondly, another pillar of the concept focus on the common good is reforms on the labor market. And Steffan said that there is one debate that how many people are going to lose their job due to digitalization, and the other debate is which are the kind of new jobs that are rising actually. And I think what we've seen not only in digitalization, but in the last 200 years from technological progress as such, is that the rationalization of labor has mainly been used to grow economic output, but not sort of to reap the benefits of time and labor rationalization towards more additional time or additional opportunities for the workers. And so we suggest that reducing working times rather than increasing economic output would make the benefits of digitalization available to a larger public. One aspect could be here, reduce the average working hours, and I guess I'm talking about the global north here again, but also about the takeoff countries maybe. Reduce the full work week from 40 hours to, let's say, 32 or 26 or something like that, in order to more evenly spread the benefits of labor productivity improvements amongst the broader public. A third reform then is foster the development of platform cooperatives. Promote business models that rely on cooperative governance and include as many stakeholders as possible. The large platforms that we see, not only Facebook, Apple, Google, and others, but also Uber or Airbnb or so, are proprietary markets. The companies themselves, they sort of own or at least run the whole market. And this development has several reasons, but it's also due to the natural monopoly effect, or the winner takes it all effect, which does not have to be bad in the first place. But if such an effect is taking place, and if there's one platform governing or owning large parts of a market of a space, then it should be governed much more by publicly or by commons-oriented policies. And cooperative platforms are one way of fostering business models that take into account that there's more stakeholders than just the very platform operator who could benefit. And there's lots of examples at the micro levels for cooperative platforms, be it for online shopping. There's alternatives to Amazon like Fairmondo or so. There are alternatives to TaskRabbit or MyHammer, where you can hire workers and handcraftsmen. There's Loconomics, for example, as an alternative to TaskRabbit, MyHammer. In the field of mobility, we have Uber on the one side, a pretty proprietary platform, but there's other apps like TransUnion Car Service, Union Taxi, the app-based driver associations, where there are cooperative models of running mobility services. And I think there's plenty of ways policymakers can foster the development of such cooperative platforms and also help create an environment that such cooperatively run platforms can flourish. And then finally, the last pillar of focus on the common good is the question of open data or open source project and the whole endeavor of a data governance. And I think we argue for much more publicly governed data management here, particularly to develop a data governance policy that could be within countries or within a region like the EU, or maybe even at a global level, with a view to data justice, including that, for example, public data trusts that try to bridge the gap between private interests and proprietary interests and the larger public. How could that be? I think we need to look into the sectors. Let's take the mobility sector. There's companies like Uber, but also Google Maps, who have lots of data on mobility, even at the micro level, you know, in a community or in a city. And on the other hand, in those communities and cities, you have for example, in Europe, in a lot of countries, you have publicly owned mobility companies, you know, community transportation organizations. They also have, traditionally, they have lots of information and data. Now, how can you bring that data together to make the most benefit out of it? And I think as long as you keep them private, you cannot reap the benefits of an integrated data management and of new technologies like mobility as a service platforms reaping the potentials of that data. But on the other hand, if you just make them open, it's the high risk that the large players such as Google Maps take the most advantage because they have the biggest capacity in developing AI technologies and others that develop new business cases and models and applications. So I think we need public data trusts that try to bridge the gap between these private interests in data and making them available to a larger public. And the public data trust could define access and benefit sharing models, who's using the data for what, under which circumstances, who gets some of the rewards. And you could think of such data trusts in mobility or in city-related data with regard to smart cities or energy or the agricultural sector. I think we probably need several of those data trusts and an overarching public data governance strategy on policy that tries to pave the way here. Okay, let's zoom out here again. I'm trying to stop the screen sharing. Okay, and just finally, let's zoom out. I think you can see that with the guiding principles, we suggest that we need a much more active role of policymaking in shaping digitalization so that it unleashes its full potential to contribute to social and environmental sustainability goals. Yeah, one could probably say digitalization has a lot of potential, but does not automatically make those contributions. And I think in our book, we offer lots of tools, concepts, and ideas how we could scale up the benefits and sort of try to mitigate the risks in order to make digitalization work better for sustainability transformations.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, Tilman. Was that a pause to go to the chat, or did you want to come in, Steffan?
Exactly. I think this was our second input block, and we can take it to the chat now and can see. Maybe we have some more time for the policy section, but
sure.
Maybe that will be quite different with the limited 15 minutes we still have. Or we can see I'm available.
I've seen that the chat was very active. I wanted to ask if Bjorn Soren wanted to come in. I could see he wanted to leave, but that he stayed, and it wasn't clear to me. Bjorn, are you still here? Do you want to come in with a question or comment?
Yes, I'm still here. I was so fascinated by the discussion, so I couldn't leave. Congratulations on the book and terrific presentation. So yes, on the last point on the public governance data, I think we consider this crucial. Also, I'm Søren Kiegel. I work for the European Commission, specifically on digital and sustainability and climate action. So we work a lot on what we say the twin transition between digital and green, and are developing now also policies, principles for this area, standards, and then second also we will launch a green tech coalition, whereby then basically the key issue there is to greening the ICT sector, what you've described, you know, to hold Google and the others really accountable, because of, as you nicely pointed out, there are contradictory policies towards this topic. And then second, where we would love to get your input and comments is on our programs more on the enabling part of digital, as you mentioned very nicely, is new, you know, the sharing economy, tokenized economy. So I've shared in the link in the chat one of the initiatives we're currently developing on supporting clean tech digital startups, because we believe, actually that's my question to you. I have a question. What role do you think clean like startups, do we need tech pull or tech push? Meaning, what I mean by tech push is investments more into startups and digital companies that develop clean solutions, or pull, basically more investments and programs towards helping the adoption of technologies into not just businesses, government, and civil society.
Wonderful question. Tilman and Steffan, over to you.
I can start. Yeah, thanks a lot. I don't have a clear answer on that. I think, and oh, now he's gone. I hope he still hears me. I think both, and it depends on where. But I'm certainly a fan of the what did you call it now? The push factor. I think it's but now not only from an environmental point of view, but also from the social cooperative point of view, because it's really hard for the, you know, they are the firms that try to make it differently, but they have a hard time finding the finances for it, and they are competing with actors who are so big and have so much money at their hand to develop new tools, and in the end buy the small ones up. So I would be a big fan on that. I want to add one more thing, because you said in the commission you do green IT and then enabling. And what I'm wondering, I don't know whether that fits into your work, but what I'm wondering is whether it's also possible to look at the risk side. You know, for example, when we discuss the driverless car, there are studies that are very from environmental institutions that are very skeptical, you know, that say, well, it can really increase transport a lot. So there is risk. There's not only potentials and enabling aspects there, and whether you can also keep that in mind would be my hint or my question.
Thank you. That do no harm. Yeah.
Yeah. Just one more addition here. I think Björn, I think we should stick our heads together maybe in afterwards, because Steffan and me, together with other colleagues, we're just launching a new project called Digitalization for Sustainability, European Research in Dialogue. And we're trying to develop principles, but also solutions amongst a dozen of different researchers from European countries, universities, and also some players from business and NGO. And we're actually having our first workshop next week. And I think there might be some interesting points of collaboration with the principles that you just mentioned, with the principle for digital development project that you're obviously engaged in.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tilman, and thanks, Bjorn. Just to add something that might be relevant that we're working on, we've been asked to develop a global environmental data strategy, which starts to look at this broader global governance framework for environmental data, for the underlying architecture, for some of the public-private partnership safeguards, et cetera, et cetera. So we are kicking off a series of regional processes to begin to understand what that would even look like. And it would be great if we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. If you're already looking at some of these broader governance topics, it'd be great to team up and really try to piggyback as much as possible. So that's certainly one thing we could potentially collaborate around. The other thing we are starting to kick off very soon, as you know, the Secretary General has this digital cooperation roadmap, and we are carving out an environmental action plan within that roadmap, together with the German Environment Agency, UNDP, the International Science Council, and Future Earth. And we're putting together sort of a 2-year action plan. And again, we're looking for partners, we're looking for ideas, events that we could connect into that. The idea is this becomes a global umbrella for some of the flagship, digitalization and environment movements that are going around the world. So we'd love to chat to you as well about how we could potentially converge activities. I wanted to come in with a question. There's this expression sort of emerging that laws are becoming code and code is becoming law. And I'm wondering if you have any insights on how legislators can begin to write law in a way that it can be translated into code, or maybe more specifically, algorithmic code. And how can we support computational sustainability and the move towards integrating sustainability data, metrics, and values into the whole algorithm world in terms of optimizing for sustainability and optimizing for sustainability outcomes. Do you have any expertise or guidance on how the heck we can open up that conversation?
Big question, David. I think it's going to be difficult, and this is also a question of digital literacy amongst policymakers. I think a huge challenge is here that policymakers are often not the youngest generation, the native digitals, and it's kind of tough to translate the regular insights from policy fields such as mobility or energy or agriculture, so into a language that can be used for code making. But I'd bring one example, and that is the question of transparency in AI. I think it's hugely important that we not only talk about making artificial intelligence or machine learning, deep learning or so tools more transparent. I mean, this is a whole research strain within AI research, so that we, as even the programmers, have to understand why is the AI, the deep learning neural network, so bringing about a certain results. But on the other hand, I think we need to talk about criteria, preferences that must be defined by policymakers or by society, I shall say, which need to be built into the AI systems. Because let's say deep learning tools, they always have some preferences built in there, to achieve certain outcomes, to become trained with the data. And I think the way these preferences are formulated should not be the responsibility of the tech companies or the programmers, but of larger policymakers. And that's where I see is a lot of potential to make those tools, machine learning, deep learning, work better for sustainability goals.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think one interesting space, it gets into this whole world of digital twins used in the private sector. What are the digital twins optimizing, and how do we increase interoperability between public sector digital twins and private sector ones. In particular, I'm thinking about Destination Earth and the digital twin of the planet that the Commission is building. That's a huge investment. How do we get the data coming out of Destination Earth to start informing some of the private digital twin models, as you say, so that certain sustainability parameters can be optimized in those? And how do we just make that data ecosystem and that analytical ecosystem work for sustainability? I feel like I'm monopolizing the conversation. I don't mean to be. I'm looking for hands up. If any colleagues want to come in with a further question or comment. We had booked off, I think, 2 hours for this discussion, but I think we normally these last an hour and a half. So we said an hour and a half people could conclude, but then if some people wanted to stay on, we could sort of continue for another half an hour. So I just wanted to say that we're approaching that mark, but it's not going to be a hard stop. We'll continue having the discussion, but at 4:30, I might need to allow some people to leave, so that might interrupt. But I wanted to see if other colleagues wanted to come in on any of these questions. In particular, if Yashwen is in the audience, there she is. She's got her hand up. We mind merged there. Yashwen, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, David. Thank you. Hi, thanks a lot, and congratulations to the great presentation. First, I need to apologize that I missed 15 minutes in your presentation in the second part because I have to go out and to answer a call. But I have two questions in general. The first one is, I'm very interested in when you talk about the possibility to put a brake for the global north in order to fill the digital divide issue. My question here is, when you say put a brake, are you talking about, for example, from the perspective of inclusiveness, are you talking about a DAO system that maintain at the same time sort of like for groups of people who have access to the digital devices and digital ecosystem, and for the group of people like senior citizens who do not yet have the capacity to do it in the global sense, in the global north. This is what I see as a value when you are talking about putting a brake, maybe, but there will be added cost to maintain a system in this nature. But in general, from the environmental perspective, the question would be, how do you create an incentive mechanism to allow a brake to be placed for global north? So this is the first question. And second question is, for the one that maybe you have already mentioned in your presentation, about different type of governance structures in the future. What do you see, for example, the role like international organizations in this type of new type of distributed governance structures? And organizations, no matter international organizations or national organizations in the past, were sort of born to represent certain level of centralized structure and power. And then to be part of this digital transformation process and part of this shift structure of governance, how do we see us differently as a public good producer and manager as an international organization? So it might be relevant to the role of international organization in the global governance context, but it might also be relevant to the internal organization structure for organizations like UNEP. So this is the second question. Apologies again.
Thank you. As always, Yashwen, amazing questions. I think you just surpassed Francesco in terms of difficulty level. So nice work. Please, I mean, I'm all ears, especially about that second question. This is kind of the question of the decade right now. So please, both questions are awesome, but please go ahead.
Thank you.
Tilman, I can say something concerning the first one, and you can keep on thinking about the second one, okay?
I was about to suggest that.
Well, I was first. and the first one is difficult as well. So I mean Tilman said to put a break for the global north, and I agree content-wise, but then I think it's quite difficult to, you cannot just, I don't know a policy that says, okay, just stop using it more. So I would say the way I always look from the macro perspective, the way I would see it is to get much stricter targets and then policies regarding environmental throughput overall. So regarding CO2 emissions, regarding resource use, etc. The EU now says 2050 climate neutral, etc. All the targets don't suffice. So this is, I think, from the political perspective, really where we have to where we have to go a step further, and also in the US and other countries of the global north. So I think when you do that step, then you also get some type of break to digitalization, because it is related to a lot of resource use, and it is related to CO2 emissions. So it either means less digitalization, not than today, but then otherwise would happen. And I think it means, and I made that point before, a different type of digitalization. You get incentives to have data sufficiency. You get incentives to get technical sufficiency. I don't know whether you missed that part, but yeah, that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, great. I was trying to think hard about the second question. I have to admit, maybe we need to open it up to the audience, because I cannot provide a good answer. But I want to add to the first one, well, if I may, okay? And say that, first of all, I think it's a misconception to assume that technological progress in digitalization just comes from the Silicon Valley or from somewhere else, and policymakers had nothing to do with it in the past. I think you can read the whole story of the rise of digitalization also as a story of deregulation, active deregulation, starting with the telecommunications markets, but also starting with service markets and service trade, etc. So I think there's good books out there from Dan Schiller. There's a book from the year 2000 who very nicely analyzes that, and there's more recent books on digital capitalism who tell the story how active deregulation has contributed to the rise of digitalization, ICT applications. So one thing would be put a break, could mean that start actively promoting it, but I want to bring some other examples. Like, let's take the very basic example of 5G networks. And I think that's good. It's a prime example of, at least in Germany and some other countries in the global north, they've been actively pushing from the side of governments to create the framework conditions that 5G can be established, and to support companies in establishing 5G. But no one has really asked the question, who wants it and what are we going to use it for? It's really funny. If you look at the brochures and the studies that support the question why 5G is enabled, there's lots of arguments which are already obsolete. We're not going to have self-driving cars within the next 1, 2, 3 years. This is a hope from yesterday, probably in 10 years, maybe. But, so the main reason for pushing for 5G has become obsolete in the meantime. And I think we need to much more stringently think about infrastructure development, not only 5G, but you could also argue smart cities, for example, or other things are data protection law, which in hypothesis put a break to digitalization. They're not going to stop technological development, but they're channelizing it into a more sort of rational use forms.
Thanks a lot. That answers actually very well my questions, and I think what I get from you also as well. The regulation process would add the cost to the deregulated status of the digital deployment. So that is a way to define the meaning of break that you were talking about. And also what Steffan has also mentioned is about setting the right standards and then from environment perspective as well, is a way to actually slow down a little bit expedite resource expenditure as well, in a way that without sufficient cautions there. Maybe I can ask one follow-up question. If there is if you do foresee it can be a standard making process, what I find it might be challenging for Global South is when they don't yet have the capacity to understand yet what the standard really mean. So will we actually see again this sort of like a standard making process led by global North, despite we nicely call it the break, but it can also be a break to the global South. So it's not necessary question, but maybe just like a follow-up thoughts about it for further discussion. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yashwin, and obviously fantastic set of questions and insights. Very happy that you're on the UNEP team thinking about these things. We can collaborate around them. I wanted to acknowledge that we sort of come to the end of the hour and a half, so the colleagues that have to leave, please feel free to do so. But while they're still here, colleagues are really, Steffan and Tilman, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for sharing the lessons from the book. I do encourage colleagues to buy it or get the PDF of it, whichever format suits you. It's a great book. It's a great introduction, and it really lays out a lot of the key issues that we need to be thinking about inside UNEP. I wanted to put colleagues on the spot, Steffan and Tilman. If you are now in control of the UN Environment Program and you are now formulating the digital transformation strategy and policy for UNEP for the next 4-year period. What would be the top 2 or 3 issues that you put on our agenda? Over to you.
Wow, I mean, this involves the question: what is the capacity of UNEP to actually implement policies, right? Because it's a program by the UN. It's not a government as such. But I understand your question a little bit like, if you would be the president of the world, what would you do? Just kidding. And maybe this brings us to the policy part, and maybe we can just, instead of giving another big presentation, the third part, maybe we skip that right now and we rather encourage people to buy the book, but maybe we can just give some ideas of the policies that we suggest in the book. And this could also serve as a inspiration for you to develop a UNEP program, right?
We can do that, but I'll still come back to this question. I won't let you off the hook that easily. Let's go ahead. We can do it. Obviously, we can go through the policy recommendations, but then I really do want some guidance in terms of the actual specific issues. As you say, we can help implement policies, we can build capacities, we can convene stakeholders, we can help develop standards. There's all kinds of things we can do. The question is, where do you think the most value we can add in this space might be? So let's go through the policy side, and then we can wrap up with your recommendations to us. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think Steffan and me, we should just run through the policies that we've prepared, but to those that maybe link to the work that UNEP could do. And I don't know, Steffan, maybe we can just play it vice versa or so, and then throw the balls to each other. I start with research. I mean, UNEP has a great body of doing research. One of them is the resource panel, which tackles the whole question of decoupling. And I think that we need much more knowledge and expertise of understanding under which conditions and by way of which policy measures decoupling can be improved. And I think so far there has not been any research devoted to decoupling and digitalization. So this could be something that UNEP could really explore much more in depth. I think Steffan and me, we have done some, I would call it preliminary research. We probably opened up the debate here, but there's still lots to do. So this is just one idea. I don't know, Steffan, you want to just come in and then?
Yeah. I'm more sticking to the question of David, and I guess I'm not familiar enough with what you do and what you can do, but I'm just going to put out some ideas there, and maybe something works. So what I think on a global scale is really the interesting question, and I touched upon that, is how do we get the value creation distributed more evenly across the world? And as you can call it digital capitalism, or the big digital firms, they are concentrated very much at the moment, and I think it's a problem for many countries to not getting a piece of that. I have two more. The second one is using digitalization for sufficiency measures, and I think that's generally speaking, I think we need, certainly in the global north, we need more focus on sufficiency measures, because otherwise, for example, the 1.5 degree goal, from my analysis, will not be reached. And digitalization brings about, first, a lot of technological possibilities here, as I gave examples already, but also from a discursive, do you say that, point of view? Everybody's talking about digitalization. When you start with digitalization as the topic, and then you say it can help improve sufficiency measures, I think that's a great strategy that can work to bring forward the environmental agenda in a more consequent manner. And I think the third point is actually quite similar. So think about what type of more radical changes we need from an environmental perspective, be it in agriculture, in energy, in mobility, and then think about what role can digitalization play in that, and use digitalization to bring forward those changes. So bring forward the idea to have less cars and more public transport, because digitalization can also help there. Bring forward the idea of 100% renewables, although I guess that it is already quite widespread. Bring forward the idea that agriculture has to move beyond monocultural production, because digital tools can help there. I think from a discursive point of view, that can make a lot of sense, and now you can figure out how it fits into your program.
Well, let me just follow up on that. I think those are excellent suggestions. I think one of the challenges I'm thinking through is this whole question of financial flows, and how do we align capital to the SDGs and start using fintech to ensure that it's flowing in the right direction. If you look right now at global capital flows, it's like $97 trillion of global capital, of which $1 trillion is sort of ESG aligned. So we've got a $96 trillion gap in how global capital is flowing and what it's flowing into. And I'm really wondering how we use digital technologies and fintech to kind of realign that so that $50 trillion go into ESG. And I'm wondering on that side, what's our role potentially in offering the global data, the spatial data that investors need to really understand kind of the risks across supply chains, so that we can begin to change the incentives and really understand those risks, so they're costed into the market, so they're internalized, and what's the role we can play to offer the data and the analytics to make that happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think if you get the data out, I mean, there are so many risks related to climate change and other environmental changes. When you get the data out, I think investors will change their decisions a lot. I don't know how exactly to do that, but I think it's a good idea.
Thanks. I'm glad to hear you say that. Tilman, did you have any further reflections? I'm also looking for colleagues that might want to come in. We can wrap up very soon if there are no other questions, but even if you have a lateral question, please do raise your hand, and we can ask our experts. But Tilman, did you have any further reflections?
Maybe one more idea can throw into the debate the whole question of artificial intelligence again. I touched upon it earlier. It's nowadays, like this year, last year, it's been considered the silver bullet in a way, and I think there is great potential. And I mean, in a way, it's going to be the future of informatics anyway. But I think what is deeply needed are two ideas. First of all, not all of the AI solutions, or maybe just the tiniest fraction of all AI solutions that are going to be developed will be determined towards social environmental sustainability. Other thousands of other applications will have completely different goals in mind, and these goals might be fine, you know, but they will not in the first place aim or deliver on sustainability. This is okay because we're in an open society, but what we need is criteria to improve the energy efficiency and to sort of label different types of AIs towards its energy and resource intensity. Because this will sort of bring up the question of, is AI in all cases really the best means for achieving a certain goal, or can we have it much more conventional with, you know, with regression models or, you know, some kind of statistical relations? We don't need AI for everything. So the rush on AI is an opportunity, but also a danger. And I think having criteria how to measure it, having ideas for labels or so, what are more sustainable AIs and less, would be a great thing. And also what I see in the kind of AI policy that is now, or programs, the kind of AI programs and projects that are now supported, mostly these are Earth observatory project, you know, bringing data on how to measure climate change, or how to forecast weather conditions, or how to investigate what happens in the ocean, etc., etc. So lots of AI is used for better Earth observation, whereas I think we need to shift towards using AI more in a way to nudge consumers and producers. So setting up a program or a project, or just doing a series of hackathons or something like that, you know, via UNEP, to encourage using AI to bring consumers and producers better together in order to achieve more sustainable production consumption strategies, I think would be very important.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've written a lot about this, and I talk about this a lot, and I would love to think if we could put together a hackathon with you and with your team, where we actually look at this question and try to come up with that answer. We've been talking with Amazon, for example, about exactly what you say. You know, how do we get the Amazon platform to begin to offer information first and foremost to consumers about the footprint of their products, and then use AIs to basically drive more uptake, more comparability, more nudging, you know, calculation of environmental footprint in their baskets, all these things. They're just completely underutilized tools. And there's huge opportunity there. So I would actually love if you'd be willing to have a conversation around that, to think about doing a hackathon around that. We have one more question, then we'll wrap up. I think it's Frank is coming on. Frank is doing a lot of work in terms of mobile applications, and how mobile applications could sort of consolidate data and help drive sustainable consumption by the end user. So, you know, there's a huge amount of data going into mobiles. How can they really help? So maybe I'll let Frank talk about his application, and you guys can have a conversation around his question. Frank, over to you. Frank, can you hear me? We can't hear you.
I hope now. Maybe?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Hi, David, and hi, Tilman. Yeah, as you mentioned already, we have quite a big approach and vision, as you called it, even with sustainable consumption and making transparency into consumption, and using AI for this, and AR. It's already tested with the BMBF project for augmented reality, and we now try to applicate AI, and I think Tilman should be interested, and maybe I should try to reach you again. I tried some time before, and maybe we could have a longer discussion about it. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Frank. I think that would be great to broker or bilateral between the two of you. I think, do we have one more question coming up? I see one hand. Where's the hand? Maybe we're done. Yeah, I think we're exhausted. So, colleagues, thank you very, very much. That was as stimulating as I hoped it would be. Really, really appreciate your time. Thank you for all the advice. I think we're completely aligned in terms of what we should be doing in some of the big areas. Actually, I have one more question before we wrap up, if we've got a couple of minutes. For me, the European Green Deal is huge in terms of setting a European space and regulatory environment that could potentially become a global de facto standard. It happened with GDPR, and I can see the potential happening again in terms of the Green Deal, in terms of all the regulation that's coming up. I'm wondering if you have advice on, if we're starting to think that might become a global de facto standard, what can we already begin to do to influence the shape of what's happening at the European level so that it can more easily be globalized or more easily be socialized to the global level? What can we start to do now to really get the global buy-in for some of these new standards? I'm thinking in particular about the digital product passport, the idea that every product and service in the European market needs to have a digital data pod that goes with it, where all of the data around its environmental footprint and carbon footprint and provenance and disposal pathways need to be incorporated. This is potentially a transformative idea, but it would have global implications due to the supply chain data that would be required. Do you have a sense of how we can sort of engage globally on this big vision and support the union in taking forward some of these big initiatives with a global lens, with an inclusion lens, and with a lens to really socializing and helping to eventually globalize?
Again, quite a big question, David. Thanks. It's challenging. I mean, you mentioned GDPR. You mentioned the product pass now. I think I would have brought that up too. A third idea is that the EU will probably much more comprehensively lay out a strategy for or standards for IT design principles and IT devices, like that these devices should be built more modular, that they should conform to certain environmental and labor standards, that software updates need to be provided until the end of the lifetime, etc. Maybe even something like a right to repair is even discussed at the EU level, which would be very far-reaching, So I think all the sets around the hardware and the actual production of the devices could become a de facto global standard if the large market of the EU, as probably one of the biggest buyers of all these devices, will come up with a comprehensive policy set here. So influencing, shaping that agenda, I think, would much improve the chances that interest from countries of the global south, in particular, could be heard at the table.
Thanks very much. Any reflections, Steffan, before we close?
No, that's fine.
Okay, great. We've taxed your respective brains and delivered our zinger questions. I mean, this just reflects the interest, I think, and the passion we all have for this particular topic, and the fact that we're all struggling with many of these big policy questions and the real value we can play. And as you mentioned, we've got sort of the 10 years left to sort of advance the SDGs, advance global climate action, biodiversity action, nature action, pollution action. The time frame is very short, so there's just no other tool that moves at this speed and scale, or set of tools. And so obviously we have to embrace this, but as you say, embracing it without thinking about the broader enabling environment and that broader sort of the systems transformation that goes hand in hand with it is fundamentally essential for this to actually yield the kind of dividends we're thinking. So again, thank you so much for joining our group, for joining this conversation. We look forward to taking forward some of these concrete suggestions with you and really working with your research team on tackling some of these issues. So again, from our Executive Director, Ingrid Anderson, thank you so much, and congratulations again on the book.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you,
Thanks, everybody.